Today when we use 16mm film, it usually comes in two choices. 100-foot rolls, which are wound onto spools called daylight spools and can be handled outside of absolute darkness for loading into cameras such as the Bolex, or larger 400-foot rolls which come in film cans. These need to be handled in complete darkness and are wound around a plastic core for loading into larger cameras like Arri SR2s and Atons. But sometimes you might come across an older 16mm movie camera that looks like this, and it doesn't take film on cores or spools. Instead, it took 16mm magazines, and I don't mean a regular film magazine like we see on a larger camera, I mean one of these. Starting in the 1930s, Kodak released small metal magazines that contained 50 feet of 16mm film for use in specific cameras. Models like this magazine Cinekodak 16mm camera that I have here. These are older cameras, which means spring-wound motors and very basic functions so that they could be used by amateurs for home movies. 50 feet of 16mm film is loaded into one of these metal magazines, and they will easily drop into these cameras, similar to loading a Super 8 camera, but this predates Super 8 by about 30 years. The magazine has a little area at the front where the film is exposed. It has a sliding cover that protects that film while it's outside of the camera, but when loaded into the camera, this cover slides away as a switch engages with the magazine, and then you're ready to shoot. 16mm magazine film hasn't really been in production since probably about the 1980s, but the wonderful people over at the Film Photography Project have actually taken a lot of these old metal magazines and loaded fresh film into them, which means that you can use these cameras that were made from the 1930s into the 1960s and start shooting with them again. The Film Photography Project offers choices for black and white reversal, color reversal, and color negative film in these magazines. And this is mostly just the Kodak 16mm stocks that is widely available for other cameras as well, but it is double perforated as that's what these magazines require. You buy the film, developing, and scanning together all at once, and when you're done shooting, you mail the film back to them in New Jersey so that they get their magazine back and you get your film developed. The Film Photography Project sent me one of their black and white reversal 40 ISO film magazines along with this Cinekodak camera. So I got to try some of this stuff out. The Cinekodak 16 magazine camera can take a variety of lenses. I only have a standard 25mm with mine, and it just kind of clicks onto the front. The camera has a viewfinder on the top, which you adjust based on the focal length of your lens. The slider moves to different markings, so for mine I set it at 25mm. Like many early amateur motion picture cameras, this has a spring-wound motor for advancing the film. Wind it up and then shoot using this trigger at the front. This is also an entirely manual camera when it comes to exposure and focusing. There's no focus aid or anything in the basic viewfinder on the top, so you just have to eyeball based on the distance markings on the lens. The shutter angle on this camera equates to something close to 1/30th of a second, so using a light meter I can determine my aperture that I set on the lens. The standard frame rate for amateur cameras of this period was 16 frames per second, which means some choppy looking footage, but also more runtime than shooting at something like 24 or 30 frames per second, which we're more used to now. So 50 feet of film in these magazines at 16 frames per second means just over 2.5 minutes worth of footage. It's a fun experience to shoot 16mm on something this compact, and is very different from using a bulkier camera like a Bolex. The Bolex, though, has a wider variety of lenses and can take 100-foot rolls of 16mm that are more widely available. This style of magazine was also available from Kodak in regular 8mm film, and it works basically the same way. The Film Photography Project has offered the same service for 8mm magazines as it does for 16mm, but at the moment they look to be sold out. Now, there is also the potential for you to get some of these old magazines and load fresh film into them yourselves, but it kind of depends on how confident you are because they can be a little tricky, and it also has to be done in complete darkness and using double perforated 16mm film. Filmboy24 here on YouTube, who does a lot of great motion picture related videos, has made a video on reloading those magazines, so definitely go check out that, and I'll link to that in the description below. I love what the Film Photography Project does, and even if you're not specifically interested in the magazine film, they still offer film developing, and they carry a lot of film, including obscure stuff. They also have a channel here on YouTube where they do a film photography podcast, so check that out if you're interested. I'll link to all of their stuff down below. I can see the appeal of using some of these older cameras, but it is also important to understand what you get with them. Like, the quality of the footage you're going to receive is going to be very different from what you would achieve on a Bolex or especially a higher end camera. But I know there's people out there who have found a lot of charm in the experience of using these cameras. Thank you so much for checking this out, and especially thank you to the Film Photography Project for sending me some of this film so that I could play around with it along with this really nice camera. They're awesome, they're run by super passionate people, and the stuff that they offer has probably allowed a lot of people to get into exploring film for themselves. You can find other links in the description for ways to support the channel through a little bit of merch that I have available, along with a Patreon and even a PO box address if you have some interesting film stuff that you want to send along. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.